We're going to start this actually by watching a couple of clips, is what I was told. So I'm going to hold off introducing everybody so that you know who's who, and I think why don't we just get right into the clips, but we're going to be seeing clips from Citizen Coke, from Park Avenue, from Detropia, and from the house I live in. So why don't we just do that first?
Interests are warping politics, there's no better place to look than the state level.
Money is a weapon.
More than $3.5 billion has been spent making this election the most expensive on record.
Any chance we'll ever get to be a completely red state? What can we do to help you?
The Koch brothers own a number of companies, refineries that specialize in some of the worst types of oil.
How much have you put into Wisconsin?
Since January of last year, just over $10 million.
$10 million.
Wisconsin is open for business.
You know, the first question people ask, Governor, why haven't you been on a debate? You have to raise $500,000 in the last 90 days. What kind of country are we?
Rick, I'll tell you what. $10,000?
I'm not in the betting business, but
okay.
I am a Republican. I don't think the party represents what it used to represent, the common man.
If it wasn't for the union, I couldn't have retired.
We started out giving $117 million worth of tax break to wealthy people, and in contrast, doubling the taxes on the poorest parents.
Wisconsin's where the people were overpowered by money.
You cannot even buy a Democrat congressman for $2,500. A Republican congressman seems to take more, $140,000 plus a yacht.
The highest court in the land has the lowest ethical standards.
This is really about to find a way to spend money in elections without telling anyone who you are.
And why would you want to do that?
Well, that's a good question.
Well, we don't discuss our funding, but we're...
Mr. President, game on!
bust the unions, it's over.
It's a power grab to change not only the rules of the game, but to take us out of the process altogether.
This is an agenda that the less than 1% wants.
I can't hire a lobbyist to lobby my causes in Washington. A lobbyist is not in my budget.
This can't happen. This is wrong.
You're just gonna keep crushing the middle class, crushing the poor people.
And I'm losing my benefits.
I want to thank Charles Koch.
Don't the Kochs own 6 paper factories and an oil pipeline in Wisconsin?
I'll take another question.
Listen to me, America. You're unimportant. They don't care about you because you don't bring a check.
If you never voted before, I bet you will now.
This is where our money is. People lost their homes in the banking and mortgage crisis, and it went here.
740 Park became the epicenter of the people who ruled the world, truly the masters of the universe. They all live in 740 Park. You've got David Koch, the richest person in the building, and Steve Schwarzman, the poster child of capitalistic greed.
There are some in society that have a lot of access, a lot of social mobility, a lot of resources, as opposed to other people who are more disadvantaged, more underprivileged, don't have the same levels of resources.
They think if you work harder, if you seize opportunities, then you should be able to get ahead.
We're not that kind of society anymore.
Money talks in American politics today. Those at the top have done well. They've invested in policies that are favorable to them churned a lot of that money back into politics.
There is so much financing of political campaigns. There are so many bought politicians.
Millions of dollars from Republican politicians.
More than $50 million, for example, to lobby in Washington since 2006.
Money is being used to buy results. That is the problem. That's how I use money.
Jack Abramoff has pled guilty to federal corruption charges. They influence American politics on a completely different dimension than anybody else.
We want the maximum freedom to launch businesses, create opportunity, and expand prosperity.
They feel they need not $10 billion, but $20 billion of wealth. America became a place where money buys everything.
The idea of the American dream is that everyone's got an equal opportunity. You just got to decide to play.
It doesn't seem to accept the possibility that if you're poor enough and your schooling is bad enough, you don't really have an opportunity to compete.
I find it hard to be an optimist right now for people who want to support their families through work and can't.
While following the steps that so many Americans take through the world of the drug war, I couldn't help but notice that at every stage, Black Americans were disproportionately represented.
You know, in any war, you've got to have an enemy. And when you think about the impact, particularly on poor people of color, there are more African Americans under correctional control today in prison or jail, on probation or parole, than were enslaved in 1850, a decade before the Civil War began. And that's something we haven't been willing to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what's really going on?
As it turns out, nearly everyone I talked to knew all about the impact of the drug war on Black America.
There's no question that the criminal laws impact disproportionately on poor and minorities.
Certainly disproportionate number of Black people are prosecuted.
Yet while people could tell me all about their firsthand experience of this, very few had any idea where it came from.
Of Detroit, you're watching it live. These are houses that are never coming back. It's going back to the prairie, and these houses are just disappearing from the landscape.
I want to show you something. All this is empty. They built a new plant in Mexico and took all the work to Mexico.
For factory support, which is the guys that are making $14.35, their new proposal is $11 an hour, which means they would lose $3.35 an hour on their wage.
Why? What do you think you're going to feel every day going into work?
One of the big hot-button issues in Detroit is the layout of the city. And right now there's questions about what parts of the city may be shrunk.
I don't know if y'all understand, but they shutting down schools. They shutting down futures, basically.
We're not going to accept any more downsizing. We want to hear about upsizing, big sizing Detroit.
It's going to be difficult. The city is broke. I don't know how many times I have to say that.
We looked at Baltimore, we were looking into New York City, and Detroit came up. We can experiment here.
What happened in Detroit is now spreading throughout. There's no buffer between the rich and the poor.
Only thing left is revolution.
If the good Lord let me live, I'll die in Detroit.
So let's get to it, shall we? Because this is a big subject with some big talent on the stage. I don't know about you, but it's the films like that that get me up in the morning and make us so happy at Full Frame to do the job that we do. I'm going to very quickly introduce everybody to save time. Directly to my side is Rachel Grady, who was one of the directors, along with Heidi Ewing, of Low-Key Films that made Dotropia, as well as Jesus Camp. A great, great film. Next to her is Claire Aguiar. Claire Aguiar with ITVS. And tell me your title one more time.
Executive Content Advisor.
Executive Content Advisor, but the former VP of Programming, correct? Next to her is Mette Hoffenmeyer. Mette is she's in broadcast at DRTV, which is Danish public television, but she most importantly was the executive producer of Alex Gibney's film that we saw the clip from, Park Avenue, and we'll get to more about that. Next to her is Carl Deal and Tia Lesson, both the wonderful directors of Trouble the Water, but also the film you first saw the clip from, Citizen Coke, and all the way at the end, our returning champion, Eugene Jarecki, director of The House I Live In, and also of Why We Fight, which I'm going to bring up later in this discussion. So I want to get started. How many people here read the piece in The New Yorker? We saw, oh, everybody, okay. We want to very quickly just give a lay of the land for those of you that did not read the piece in The New Yorker called A Word from Our Sponsor. And I want to start with Claire. I want to talk a little bit about Park Avenue in particular, and what happened with Alex's film and how it came to ITVS. And then we're going to move to Mette.
Yeah, and if you haven't read the piece in New Yorker, it's available online and you could read it. It's a piece by Jane Mayer that focuses primarily on two films. And the first is the film Park Avenue by Alex Gibney. And we'll talk a little bit more about Citizen Coke, the second film by Carl and Tia later. The article talks about what happened with this film by Alex Gibney called Park Avenue, Money, Power, and the American Dream. And this is a film that deals with an address, 740 Park Avenue, where there is the highest concentration of billionaires in New York. And the history of ITVS and broadcasting in general was that this is a film that was chosen to be one of the 8 films that was part of an initiative called Why Poverty, of which Mette and DR, as well as I think over 60 international broadcasters was part of, including ITVS, a film about...
70.
70, okay. A film about the discrepancy between wealth and also the connection with power. We had selected that film as one of the features. There were also short films featured online. And as the kind of come broadcaster, ITVS was able to air the film on the series Independent Lens on PBS. So we aired the film on PBS, which was a national broadcast on Independent Lens, and it was a great success. It's a film that really exposes a lot of the not only the discrepancy of wealth, but that concentration of wealth, and also gives a little capsule introduction to the Koch brothers, David Koch and Charles Koch, and their activity with funding what they fund. I'll leave it at there.
And Mette, it was one of 8 films originally, correct?
Yes, it is one that was commissioned to do. Actually, we asked Nick Fraser and me, we asked Alex if he could come up with an idea about a film on inequality in America to be part of Why Poverty. And Why Poverty is 8 films produced by filmmakers from around the world and seen now by more than 500 million people and 70 broadcasters around the world. And except in China and Russia, and very limited here in America, which of course was very sad for us. I do. To me, the story of Alex's film here in America was a bit maybe different because we had hoped that why poverty would be a big debate, and also here as it was many other places in the world, and it was as if, you know, first they came and they could only show 2 films at PBS and the rest of PBS World. I never heard about that as a foreigner. You ask people you know, what is PBS World? And, you know, nobody knew it, so it was I thought it was a secret channel. And then it could be 2 films, and Sola Mama is a very wonderful film, but then they didn't want to put Why Poverty on as a marketing tool so people could find the global debate. So that was removed. They could mention maybe Why Poverty, and then they put it out with no Why Poverty connection, but also with no really marketing and a debate afterwards where the filmmaker was not allowed to participate.
So they had a roundtable discussion that they broadcast after the broadcast of the film, and the filmmaker was not part of that discussion.
Yes, nobody representing the film.
And what the article points out is that Mr. Koch, one of the Mr. Kochs, David Koch, was on the board of WNET, the local PBS station in New York, and was promising a large gift, and had interfered somewhat in.
Well, you don't know if he interfered, but what you do know is that WNET has applied for huge sum of money, and Koch is also funding, I think, 60% of NOVA from WGBH. He's also on the board there. And, you know, for somebody, I tell you, coming from Europe, it's just a no-go. You'd think it's not possible that you have these extremely rich people who are funding Tea Party and other kinds of political ventures, and then at the same time sort of handing up small bits of people. You know, I was approached by people working within PBS, and they say, well, you know, he's also a good guy because he's putting money into cancer research or something like that. And you know, where's the freedom of expression? Where, you know, is everything sort of connected to your funders, and where's the independency in your editorial choices? And so I was actually quite shocked. I'm actually really upset about it in terms of also how you keep a democracy in America if you don't have the mass medias that can tell you what's really going on and show films as these old films where the filmmakers are trying to tell what really happens and not, you know, what you would want people to think or something, where you really want to go, this is what happens in society.
And just, Claire, do you happen to know, having working with ITVS, PBS World, do you know what the viewership is by any chance?
I don't. It covers all the major markets, though, but it's not measured in the same way as prime time. But I just want to add that Park Avenue was not on World. It was on Independent Lens as a national broadcast, and it actually gets covered by all the 350 stations, mostly in prime time.
And then that moves us over to Tia and Carl. And in the next phase of the article, they discuss what happened with Citizen Koch and your funding at ITVS and finishing your film. Do you want to take it up from there, just to lay the stage?
Sure. Well, there was one important detail, I think, in the New Yorker article that you didn't mention, which is apparently Neil Shapiro, the head of WNET, had threatened to pull out of Independent Lens, which would have been the death knell, potentially, for that premier venue for all of us in this room and everybody who makes quality documentary films on public television. So there was a real palpable threat that something bad could happen, according to the article.
I just want to add something. It is true there's a pre-story, because we were accused that the film was inaccurate, and Steve Segala and others were kind of attacking us in public forums, and we then presented them, Alex did, and Alex is a genius with these things, 40 pages of underlying documentation of each figure, each whatever they say, and double, and then they had to show it. So I think they were kind of forced to show it.
The important
book,
the fact book.
But you were trying to make your film.
So we were making our film, and we started our film about a year and a half earlier, and we had approached Claire, whom we know, and love the work that she does with ITVS, and we're really excited about the possibility of getting a film that was exactly about the influence of the wealthiest Americans on the public discourse and the way that they manipulate elections, politicians, and public policy. In the aftermath, particularly of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which gave them a lot more leeway to spend money in more creative ways than ever before. And so we had a wonderful relationship with ITVS for months. We got a lot of encouragement, a lot of cheerleading, and in fact, sat with Claire and showed a 2.5-hour rough cut in October of 2012, and got really good feedback and interesting notes, which we began to address. And the only thing that changed was what happened to Menta and Alex's film, which is WNET threatened to pull out of ITVS, or of Independent Lens, and had made some threats. And there was an environment that was very hostile towards this subject matter, is what we were told by not Claire, but other executives at ITVS. When we got accepted to the Sundance Film Festival, and we titled the film Citizen Coke, we immediately got phone calls from executives at ITVS demanding not only that they see the film, which we thought was great because we were hoping there was more money to come, but also that they objected to the title and to the content of the film, but would not be very specific about the changes that they were going to request in the content of the film. So, it was pretty easy to figure out that David Koch was sitting on the board. We didn't know that at the time, but that he was on the board of both WNET and WGBH. And I guess as a credit to the folks we were speaking with at ITVS, they did say, yes, that is a problem for us. And that brought us to where we are today.
That is a problem, and if you don't take the word Coke out of the title of the film, we are going to take back our commitment to fund and to broadcast your film. And that was sort of stunning to us because, look, there are 100 ways to title a film, and some of us spend as much time trying to figure out a title of a film as we do, making some of it. And we were open to other titles. We knew we hadn't cracked the nut necessarily, but when we realized that the request was being made not for filmmaking reasons, not for aesthetic reasons, not because it didn't have a good ring to it, but precisely because David Koch was exerting influence and power over at NET and GBH and on the PBS ecosystem as a whole, we thought that was outrageous. It was outrageous that ITVS was being subjected to this pressure from NET and who knows who else. And it was outrageous that then they were turning to us and making editorial demands that had to do with making a funder happy or not displeasing a funder. Because ITVS is so good, and and PBS as a whole forces you to reveal all your funders to them before you even get the funding. They scrutinize each and every contract, each and every funding source, because they want to make sure that no interested parties have an impact on the work that we do. So when ironic, right? That then it became clear that a very interested party had some impact, not directly. It's not that even David Koch picked up the phone. I don't even know that he knew about our film. Maybe he did, but what Jane Mayer did, and this is not just based on conversations we had. We spoke to the top investigative journalist, Jane Mayer at the New Yorker, who then found out a whole lot more to the story than we even, suspected. And people went on the record. They spoke to her on the record, off the record. It became clear that there was just an environment that these, folks were subjected to. And I'll say one more thing, and that is that in Meta's country, I think over 90% of your financing for public broadcast comes from public monies. And in our country, what's that? License fees. But it's not from private monies. And in our country, I think it's well less than 50%. I think it might even be less than 20% come from public monies. And so as long as there are attacks on public media and public financing of public media, these good people are going to be subjected to these really, bad pressures.
So the quote, actually, from that article from Louis Boson, who's Senior VP of Programming at ITVS, just to ensure I never worked there, is we live in a world where we have to be aware that people with power have power. And Claire, you were talking about you know, it's a time of austerity. ITVS was founded by independent filmmakers, and to help independent filmmakers get their work made. How much of your money comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, percentage-wise, roughly?
Probably roughly 80%.
80%, and that didn't used to be the case, correct?
That's always been the case.
So it's always been the case.
It's usually been 100%.
And so as the public funding has decreased, ITVS is seeking out private funding and foundation funding, correct?
Yeah, and our private funding has decreased, but our mainstay has been the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
And Corporation for Public Broadcasting is funded by the government,
The
correct?
American people,
Right.
actually by...
By our tax dollars.
Yes, by your
right?
tax dollars.
So from 30,000 feet, we've all been talking about, all of us as panelists, we've been talking about, first came media deregulation, then came Citizens United. So you have, and you were speaking about, Rachel, was speaking about being at CBS during the election year and how many advertising dollars came in during that election and how they were high-fiving each other that, wow, what a great year because we got, no, it wasn't you. Oh, sorry, Tia. Sorry, you were talking about how many advertising dollars they got in because of the election. And there was all this money flowing into the TV coffers.
Record profits at CBS.
Right.
Thanks to, Citizens United, super PACs.
So there's this horrible little cyclical thing happening in terms of how do people speak truth to power, in particular if the documentarians are picking up the mantle where journalism has left off now because of corporate pressure. How do you speak truth to power if those public outlets are being squeezed shut? Eugene?
Oh yeah, this will be easy. Well, I think maybe it starts with analyzing what we mean by speaking truth to power as a starting point. And when we... Say again? Yeah, your definition of the word is. No, when we started to distribute The House I Live In, it was clear to me that that was not what my mom always hopes I'll make in terms of a feel-good film for a Friday night date flick or something, so that we were going to be up against standard, long-standing pressures in the marketplace, multiplied by the terrible devolution of our media system in recent years, where we're fed the notion that there's been a boom in documentaries, but as Kara Murtis pointed out at Sundance London a year or so ago, she showed us, like, look at the incredible explosion there's been in documentary funding and documentary releases in the past, couple of years, or 10 years or something. She says, but you should note that of the top 140 films, 118 of them are basically like National Geographic nature films. So we're being led to think, our work, this kind of very controversial work, has become a mainstay of American homes. We should not let ourselves be fooled by that on the one hand, but I think we have to ask, since I knew we weren't going to, blow the country away theatrically, blow the country away in terms of a top-down vision of speaking truth to power. Right, speaking truth to power has the old idea that, falls apart when you really think about it, which is that the beast, this monster of a society we're evolving into, if you only speak gently to it in dulcet tones about how painful what it's doing is to poor people or to animals or to trees, it will say, I had no idea that I was dumping that in the ocean or burying those hardworking people under debt. I would never have done, I'll change my ways. And of course, the system, part of the reason Ted Kaczynski in his famous manifesto that got him notoriety and then ultimately captured, he was laughing at the left for its belief in the dulcet tone narrative, in the idea that you can gently whisper truth to power and power will right itself. Kaczynski, however, insanely thought the machine knows no language but the violence that it uses. I will respond with violence. Now, that's a tragic unraveling of a hyper-rational view. But I think you have to accept what Lois says, which is that the realities of power being what they are, we have to devise a strategy that is not naive. And so we set about speaking truth to the powerless, because that seemed to be where revolutions were born. I hadn't yet heard of a revolution that came from the powerful. So it seemed to me that we had become, as a country, we'd become enamored with a false illusion of social change, which is that a nice man like Barack Obama can come in and magically make Washington depart from its standards of corruption, even if he intended to, when likely he would never have come onto our radar if he was such a person who spoke against the prerogatives of power. So it seemed to me we had to go about the heavy lifting that isn't an atom bomb, isn't a smart bomb push button solution of going to churches, going to schools, going to prisons, going to community centers across the country and doing sort of the heavy lifting that all the good people who did house parties started some years ago that buoyed Obama to election. And then everyone gave up on that thinking, oh, thank God my sugar daddy has come and he'll solve everything. No, the revolution is a handmade tapestry of individual parts that I think we'll only get to real revolutionary change at the very cellular, local level of showing these films off the radar that's toxic. Churches aren't made toxic in that way. Prisons aren't made toxic. Schools aren't. Showing it to your friends isn't. It's only when we vie for competition against CBS and their Citizens United dollars that suddenly, how would we possibly win that game?
Except, well, now Meta, in your country, you talk about how many eyeballs actually watch public television. And that when you want to have a public debate, it's watched.
I always find it so difficult to understand what you're saying because you have so many more brain cells. But it's so complicated what you say, because the fact is that you actually have an environment in America where you can get the poorest people to vote against that they can get to hospital for free. You have like a system here where we like this, I call them do-good delusion documentaries that can be funded because they don't harm anyone. You know, you find a poor person here or in Africa or somewhere, and some rich person organization help them out of their misery, and they have a lucky day. And you know, but it doesn't tell about the system. It doesn't put things into perspective. And I think that it's really, really dangerous. So you know, this whole thing about telling the truth to the people in power, I think you have to just tell the truth to everyone. Mm-hmm. And you have to make sure that you can get this truth, or at least you pursue the truth, out to people. And I can't see, I mean, I know it's difficult and I don't understand America so well, but there must be ways where people can see what's going on, and you know, where you empower people to vote, to understand the conflict. How is it possible you have a state where they have taken away the founding fathers from the curriculum and put in Calvin, and you know, not telling about the science and all these things? In my country, well, it's not ideal. Denmark is not ideal. We are the happiest people in the world, as you might know. We have a little country with 5 million, and out of these 5 million, 1.7 million saw the white poverty films. 7%, so 2/3, knew about the debate about poverty, and 54% changed their mind about and learned more about inequality, social mobility, and all these things. So I did a survey, what means that it should be 100 million in this country who should have seen the films. 100 million, and I think maybe there was 5, I don't know, but probably as many as it was possible. But I just think, you know, a revolution would be needed, or something like that, to ensure that you have a functional democracy. And I don't know, I'm very, you know, I am very dignified about the way white poverty was just, you know, put away somewhere in a secret channel, because in the countries around the world where they took ownership of the films, they really had an impact, and they were seen by many, many people. Also in the Arab countries, the biggest Arab channels showed them, and they had huge debate online and all these things. And this is important for democracy.
Rachel, I want to get back to you in just a second, because you've done a lot of what we're discussing here. Rachel, you talked a lot about, you know, your audience will find you. Make a great film, the audience will find you. And you've been blessed, you and Heidi, you've been inside some really great production companies and good mouthpieces for your film. What do you see in terms of the new platforms for that and getting those messages out in particular? I mean, Jesus Camp was, wow, you know, and had such great distribution, and was really so influential that way.
Well, you know, that was even before there were all these options, actually, and it was like 8 years ago. I really believe in believing in your audience. I really do. I think that just they will find you, and you know, we had amazing, you know, experience with Detropia because we, you know, first of all, there's social, the social funding that we did to even get it off the ground is we had 1,000 ambassadors right from the start. And I don't know if you guys are going to have this experience, but you know, doing a campaign like that, even if you were just to raise like $5,000, I mean, even a little amount, it's a way to get people, you know, not just engaged, but they have a stake in it. So, you know, that is the way that we're going. That is the way that, you know, I think audiences, that's their expectations now. So we were able to just through Kickstarter, through, I mean, Twitter, nothing special, nothing, you know, exotic at all, find hundreds of thousands of people. And then it aired on PBS, and they were ready for it, and they knew about it, and, you know, millions more saw it, and then we were sort of in position to keep the conversation going. Right. So, I mean, I think you also have to, unfortunately, for filmmakers, because you don't get paid for this part, you have to keep it going for a couple years after, because that's really where you're going to get the tail, you know, of these conversations. And, you know, it kind of sucks, I know, because you're just working on them forever and ever,
But you guys have actually had this experience. I mean, you had a Kickstarter campaign that was very successful, correct? After everything kind of looked dire.
Sure. No, we did. I mean, look, we can talk about all the different strategies there are for getting your film seen and for creating this revolution, you know, and for reaching your audience, finding your audience. You know, we're actually very heartened that in the aftermath of the New Yorker article and alongside our Kickstarter campaign, independent groups collected 350,000 signatures of people who wanted to see this film air on PBS. Now, we didn't ask them to do that, and we feel like our run with PBS is over. We don't expect any magic to happen there. But there seems to be a critical mass of people out there that is hungry for this type of story. But I wanted to back up a little bit earlier than how do we get our film seen. It's everybody here except for us has had their PBS broadcast, has had their ITVS broadcast. And the funding landscape is so thin right now for what we do. Like, I don't even know when we get paid. You know, you said this is the part you get paid for. What part do you get paid for?
Broadcast and you've
But
all
I
gotten-
think also in this, if I can interrupt, that you're actually a bit fooling yourself with this. I mean, I think Kickstarter is fine and all the social distribution and poor Eugene, he travels all the prisons in America and get crap food in the prisons with the prisoners. And, you know, you have to do all these things to get out there, but it's still like a little minority, and it doesn't have this momentum where the whole country is saying, you know, like you do if you have a big public broadcaster, as they are in Europe, but I mean, you know, it's just like it's sort of here and there, and also it becomes random. It has no sustainability in the way of funding and distribution. It's a random system where you can be lucky, just like the poor person in Africa who can make a windmill and come to the university in America. It's the same thing. It's the same mechanism, I think. You know.
And for us, yeah, not only did we not get our broadcast, but we didn't get the dollars to finish our film, and the promised dollars. So what happened to us in the course of this is that the power that we were fighting shifted a bit. I mean, we were fighting money in politics, and we were fighting to tell these stories mostly through the voices of Republicans who felt betrayed by their own party. This is not a left-wing scribe. This is we went into the heartland and we talked to people who were fighting against their own party because they objected to the money in politics. But it's a transpartisan issue. We talked to Democrats as well, and we talked to independents, and they're all represented in our film. But what we found is that the power shifted, so we're no longer talking about the Kochs and Citizens United, we're talking about the role of public media and our public servants who are succumbing to these forces. And what we found is that we had to start by trying to force some transparency and hold this public media institution accountable, because not only for ourselves, not only for this film, I mean, as Carl said, I think I think our hopes of having a PBS broadcast have diminished, quite substantially. You probably agree, right? But
still,
but
also PBS
for
is
so
2%, and they're over 65 or something. I saw the other day the average. So
Average age.
basically, it will speak to the converted.
But-
So
but-
it's all about how you get out there.
But everybody else in this audience who's a filmmaker, we were hoping, to fight, for all of us and for our filmmaking community, because we all, fight for these dollars. We all fight for, to have our stories told. And we are open and, to compromise and to changing, the stories as to be the best films that they can be. But when this X factor comes in, when this private money comes in and helps to dictate not only the editorial demands, but the programming choices of these PBS affiliates, we need to stand up as a community, I think, because are we just writing off PBS? And we need to support the people at ITVS to say, no, what we said to ITVS is, we know, now that we've discovered that David Koch has this role of power at GBH and NET, we know it's going to be hard to have, the broadcast of the public broadcast at an independent lens that we think our film deserves. But we want to fight alongside of you. We don't want what happened to Frederick Gerten's film, Bananas, which was buried in the system. We don't want that to happen to our film. We want to fight with you. We want to fight alongside of you. Let's do this together. And that's the door that was ultimately shut in our face. But I think we all need to demand that ITVS be better, that it fight, for independent filmmakers, that it realign with its original mission, which is a really noble one that was born out of the independent filmmaking community, and that we institute some reforms. As filmmakers, we need to have a filmmaker's Bill of Rights. And we need to decide, how much is this money costing us, whether it's from an investor, or whether it's from a distributor, or whether it's from a granting institution.
But you know what's interesting about this whole situation that struck me is that what is happening to you guys, what happened to your film is obviously exactly what your film is about. It's a perfect example of form and function. And ultimately, what I hope for you is that how it went down is the beginning of a much bigger conversation than it ever could have been, even if it had been on PBS,
But that's up to all of us.
No,
we
of
can
course,
keep talking
of
about our
course.
film, but we also, as a filmmaking community, need to have this conversation together, honestly, really, about the obstacles, that we all face individually and collectively, and the forces that are at work to keep our stories.
And it's a chilling story. I mean, it's absolutely chilling, but it's also chilling at the ITVS level. I mean, Claire, you had talked to me about, what is the machine that's going to be behind these other filmmakers? If we're unable to separate out who's got the money, if that money's coming from the government, if those senators are actually, funded by super PACs, how are we going to do that even in our own public airwaves, just the public airwaves?
Yeah, I think that, we are still really committed to our ideals and that we want to work with the filmmakers to do that. But in order to do that, what we have to do is make sure that from the filmmakers that there's still this, because actually, our saying at ITVS is that without the filmmakers, we're nothing. We don't exist without your creative impulses, without your filmmaking talents, because that's what we were there to do in the first place. So I just wouldn't want this to become a sort of a death knell for independence to say, well, it's kind of a done deal with public media. It's no use to really go to them anymore because it's going to be self-censored or that it's not an alternative. And there are a lot of other alternatives, even though the financial situation is dire. But there's still possibilities, especially with public media and ITVS and PBS. And I feel committed to work alongside you for that. I think this is a really important discussion, and that's the reason why we're here today, to be able to engage in that. And personally, I wish you well with your film, and I think there are lots of different ways to get that out there, because with, as Rachel said, the audience is the key. They're the ones that are going to make that final decision, and that's why you wanted to do this thing about Citizens United in the first place, to get it out there.
And it's
Hasn't there been
working
changes
too.
in
I mean-
terms of funding also because I screen more or less every film that comes from America, and 10 years ago it was sort of very big diversity of the funding, but now I can see on the credit list that it's sort of a little group of funders, and they are in the same film, so it is as if there's there's not like many voices, but there's one voice. So if Sundance is in, then Chicken and Egg is in, and Gucci, Tribeca, or whatever. So it's a little club there. And then also I think that I don't know, but I'm just asking because what do I know? But it's just like a look at this credit list, and also it seems like HBO is not funding before they are on a festival circuit. So I would think it is really difficult for you, but so I don't know, but I can see there's a difference also in terms of in the old days George Soros had a fund you could acquire, you could try and get money for, and Skull and all these things, and it all concentrated now one place. So the diversity, I guess, in the funding is also narrowed.
Well, I think, can I just add one? No.
I'm sorry, I think you're trying to...
I'll say I'm made uncomfortable by the line of this discussion. I think this discussion is self-centered and stupid.
Wait, don't hold back.
As if to say you live in a country in which democracy itself is under siege. You've got the largest issue of our time, which is the secrecy issue in the NSA, and the unbelievable power of a central government, funded, of course, by such things as the billions that have been unleashed by Citizens United and others. You have a central government in cahoots with rich people to have made all those 150 million people poorer than the 400, to have made a country that is so extraordinarily unmoored from its founding principles that the idea of a filmmaking community, I could give a shit. There is a community of humans in a country that are deeply in peril for the democracy that's here, and supposedly we were as good as it gets. And I raise this because we've got to put this in a 40,000-foot altitude. It's not that I don't want to fight for their film, I do. It's not that I don't want to see ITVS be better. But to be fair, if I were the Koch brothers, I would give you a list very quickly of the 50 films, including Eugene's, that were funded by nice rich people rather than mean, evil rich people. And that they all are allowed to play that game. We accept the largesse of the wealthy when it services our politics, and then we find, the outrage when it comes to toxify a place like PBS. I think it's a bit convenient. That doesn't mean I'm not against it. Of course I'm against any kind of a moment where a public service institution bows to private pressure. Wow, I never see that happen in American life, except every minute of every day when let me finish please, when real hunger and real things are at stake in a direct way. So there's nothing unique about this. And the only reason to remind ourselves of that is that the battle is a larger battle between humans and the powerful, corrupt interest between centralized government and private wealth. And the fact is, that is a battle of which this is a component, and our films constantly go around these issues and deal with the various elements of that. And I can understand that there's a worthy dimension of our cause that should be devoted to the purification of PBS. For example, one could try to start a bill that would say PBS is not allowed to have any more private money, for example. But that would turn very quickly to become a bill that surely would have a component that would say, and any film coming to PBS would have to be pure of private money as well, Eugene, or any of the other filmmakers who get also some of that Gucci money or whatever. So I raise this because that purer future...
The worst thing is the Puma Award.
That purer future is worth fighting for as a component of all this, but it seems to me that what we're in is a situation where we have a fight to continue to reflect truthfully about the world at a time where, as Orwell said, universal deceit is the norm, and universal deceit is more funded and more liberally funded perhaps than ever before thanks to Citizens United. And the question is, how do we get around that? And I think I'm both dismayed, I said this to Meta before we came on, I'm more dismayed every day and more inspired every day in a way where it might as well be raining in my brain, because the fact is, the world is more frightening and more capable of controlling the flow of information and more capable of knowing what street corner I'm going to be on at 2 o'clock today, etc. But it's also more vulnerable to the Snowdens and Assanges and all of the people who've been inspired by what they did across this world, where people now know, wow, there is power in information, there's power in courage, and one single person can rattle the cage of the most powerful nation in the history of the world. That's an amazing moment where truth, thankfully, is speaking to power and the powerless across this world. Not a completely unhijacked conversation, because we spend more time, thanks to the powerful, talking about Assange's sex life than any of the content of the cables he released. But that's what we've got to get over by adding more and more content that's worth caring about all the time.
Hold on just a sec.
I think that when censorship happens, one must stand against it. One must speak about it. One must, and we can't be silenced. This is not the only discussion to be had, but this is an important discussion to be had.
I agree with that.
And,
it's just too much of it.
And I don't think that all of us filmmakers should be consigned to getting money from rich people, because frankly, your Rolodex of rich people, Eugene, because of the privilege, is much better than mine. And I think that we should demand public funding for the work that we do. We don't have...
Agreed, but I'm just saying be careful what you wish for at the moment, because the fact is, Ralph Nader wrote a book a couple of years ago that nobody saw, and I remember saying to him, why did you write a 900-page novel? People tend to read a little shorter these days. But he said, well, because I had to fit it all in. He wrote a book called Only the Super Rich Can Save Us. It's an unbelievable, imagine Ralph Nader, a consumer advocate, ultimately gets to a point in his life where he's looking to be saved by the super rich. Because when you have 150 million people poorer than 400 in this country, you have a situation where the money has been so concentrated that in fact you have to depend upon the good conscience of a Warren Buffett to step forward and say, I should be taxed, or the good conscience of a George Soros to say...
It's an easy say. I mean, honestly, it's an easy say, isn't it?
I'm not doubting whether it's an easy say.
About
Look, I'm not evaluating whether it was good that he did it. I'm telling you we're relying on some of that, because that is where a lot of the blood flow in the left and critical aspects of our education community, our academics, and our filmmaking are coming from. They are coming from conscience.
It would have been nicer if you had a system where broadcast and news feed and everything has been looking into tax system in America.
Yeah, but it'd be
so
nice
you
if we had
actually
healthcare
don't have
also.
to have this random kind of giving a little money from Buffett and
Okay,
Gates
hold
and
up,
all these
hold up,
things.
hold up. We have got to go to questions. This is exactly why we're doing this. It's a great debate, and it's exactly why we wanted all of you on the stage, because from media deregulation to Citizens United and all that, the mouthpiece of the media, it can be controlled or not controlled, and we are all in that.
I'm also not trying to be a jerk, but the strategy, hold on, but the strategy you elect to pursue when you take the whole picture into account is a completely different use of your time than the one that if you actually think it's worth vilifying a bunch of podunk executives at PBS who've been pressured by the standard operating procedure of fundraising in this beleaguered non-democracy.
I don't think anybody was vilifying PBS. I think people are vilifying the system that got it there. But we've got to have questions. We have to have questions. Right there in the center.
We have gone out of our way.
Are you
We have gone out of our way.
We got specific questions.
Hi, I'm a podunk executive from PBS. I just want to lay out some quick facts and follow Meta, dear Meta, around so I can do some little cleaning up of the facts. And then I also want to go back to the 40,000 foot view, because I think that that's valuable. In terms of our broadcasting decisions, I've never seen Citizen Coke. It's never been formally submitted to PBS. So as far as I'm concerned, that question is an open one.
Come on, no. We can't, we've got to deal in facts.
That's a true fact.
We are documentary filmmakers.
That's a true fact.
We make nonfiction.
Fact.
We're committed to the truth. That's why we do what we
that's
do.
That's a true fact.
So you can't get up there and spin this.
You
can't spin Jay Mayer of the New Yorker, and you can't spin this audience. You can't do that.
I'm going to keep on going. You've been speaking for a while. We have been proud to support films that challenge the power structure. Park Avenue was a film that I personally knew was going to disturb the universe, and I'm glad to see that it did. It got more than 4 times the national average audience for that film, We stood by that film. I am proud of that film. I hope everybody sees it. I'll send you a link. We're also proud of The House I Live In and Detropia, and we will continue to look at films that make our viewers think. And in terms of, how programs get scheduled, PBS, it takes more than a lot of brain cells to understand how we work. It takes working at least 6 months in this podunk sort of public media system to understand this many-headed hydra of how programming decisions get made.
It should be transparent, just like banks.
I'm sorry, transparency with what?
I said it should be transparent, just like banks.
Yeah, and you know what? PBS is transparent. In fact, we didn't censor Park Avenue. We aired it. WNET in New York is another story.
Do you have a question?
I do.
Okay.
So, in terms of getting back to the 40,000-foot view and thinking about public media, which gets 11.4% funding from CPB, and it isn't getting supported by the vast majority of the public. I'm just wondering, what do we expect public media to be about? Is it going to be about a diversity of viewpoints that embraces many different ideas, which is, I think, something that it attempts to do right now? Or do we see it solely as a venue for a very small, beloved group in this room? I'm sympathetic to a lot of the points of view that have been said here. I mean, we're all, I think, humanists. But at the same time, what do we want public media to be about? Is it going to be about one person's sort of world vision of how this country should be run?
Okay,
or
so
is it a
let's answer
debate?
that, because
Right.
we're really short on time. Anybody have an answer?
I mean, when I talk about the vilification of a PBS official, I don't mean that any person is saying that bad PBS person. It, by definition, puts those PBS people in position. I read the article in the New Yorker. The New Yorker article, she went out of her way, like, I know Lois. So I was wondering, is that how Lois would come across? Is that a fair? And all of them were fair. They were well done. Jane is excellent. So it was very fairly and given this sort of, God, my heart goes out to the PBS executives who's got to deal with this stuff. Every comment that got made today, including Tia's, were all about the difficult position these good people find themselves. That's not, so vilification of that means we've got to fix that. Let's leave the rest of capitalism and its trail of human destruction untouched. We're not going to debate that. Let's just fix this tiny little thing which we could perfect. It's already.
That's a different panel.
Well, let me finish.
It is a different panel. But
It's already as good as it gets right now that we have, and I'd rather be pushing on all of the areas that aren't where it's at. Is it worth publicizing all of this? Yes. What happened to them is about the sexiest thing that could ever have happened to their film.
Bullshit.
All right, but so let's really
What
quickly
happened
get...
to us happened to all of us. What happened to us?
It didn't happen to me.
It happened to the audience for public media.
It didn't happen to me because I'd be spending every single minute of my life publicizing it if it happened to me.
Next question,
And
really quick,
the
please.
public can use it.
Yeah, hi.
We're certainly doing that on the stage. So.
Hi, I have a very pointed question for you all, and I just want to say I've been on the scene for quite a while. I'm going to be brief. I founded an organization in the 60s called Newsreel. I'm one of the original founders of the IFP, and I got the largest, my company got the largest grant in the history of, do you remember this one? The National Endowment for the Humanities. We were doing a documentary about South Texas farm workers, and we got over $250,000. My point is, I've seen things come and go. What I want to know, and when I hear this discussion about ITVS, it's a wonderful organization, and PBS, I'm thinking, it's really fucked. I mean, Citizen Coke. I mean, who wants to deal with Coke? And I don't think he's possible to deal with because he's such a sneaky right-wing bastard. But what I want to say is, what's the future? That's what I want to know. What is the future? We live in the richest society on the face of the earth. I mean, I just traveled halfway around the world last month, and I'll tell you, there's a lot of money in this country. What are we going to do to keep making our films? Especially, and you've got a bad attitude, Eugene, and I like it very much.
Really quickly, Claire, I mean, you've been in the business 20 years. What do you see the future as?
Well, I've seen things come and go too. I think that you know, but I think that this is a particularly dire time, and I appreciate what you're saying in terms of, you know, okay, we don't want to mess with Coke. There are a lot of, like, angels. There are rich people who are funding really good films. There are film people who are trying to advocate for being able to do that, and they're private donors. But they're outweighed, unfortunately, by people like the Cokes. You know, my suggestion for what do we do is let's keep on and have a little faith. Because I think that the worst thing you can do is to just say, well, it's a done deal and it's over, so I'm just going to try to put my eggs in not a public media basket or in somewhere else that is going to be able to effectively bury these films.
We've got...
Or we can say ITVS. And I'm sorry, this is not navel-gazing. This is important. Who is ITVS accountable to? Is it the broadcasters or is it the filmmakers? I mean, because we struggle every day and we do want to change the world. A lot of documentary filmmakers want to change the world. Are we going to change the world with one film? I don't know. Do you need an audience for it? And
I just have a question about, you know, following up, because isn't it like still very random that you are dependent on the day, the mood that some rich person has that day when you apply to get some money? I mean, isn't it a systemic error, just like tax evasion in Africa or something? Isn't it the same thing? I mean, you know, because if you rely on this lucky day, it's not a system. It cannot ensure that you know, we can make the films we want to do and we can set the agenda and debate that we want to set. Not we, but the whole world, and I think that's, you should
Wait, we got to be fair. There's one more time left for one more question. A lot of people wanted to ask questions. I really want to get to the last question, to be fair. I really have to get to this person.
Hi. Yeah, this is actually a lot less pointed and a little more open-ended, but I just finished a documentary studies program at the New School, and it speaks a little bit to the idea of these millionaires and those millionaires and filmmakers and an audience. One of my professors, Deirdre Boyle, said that the moment you pick up a camera, you take a position. And I think that's important in any filmmaking. It's important in documentary filmmaking. I also think that viewing of a film is as much a part of the creative process as creating a film. There's a vital relationship there. There was a lot of talk earlier in the discussion about truth getting out there and expressing truth, and I wanted to know, particularly from the the filmmakers on the panel, what does the idea of subjective truth in filmmaking and in expression, where does that play a part in all of this? Thanks.
I don't know if I can quickly answer that, but just sort of piggybacking on what we were just talking about here and trying to fit that into, is that when I read that article, I was extremely disappointed and heartbroken, but ultimately not surprised. This is all human nature. It's just gotten uglier, I think. There's more money, there's more access to be, selfish. But, I mean, all of this is, it's all irrelevant. I mean, we can fight against it. We can, we should speak about it. I'm not saying not to talk about it, but you only have so much energy. And it's sort of, where are you going to put your energy? And to sort of like what Eugene was saying, it's like, forget a boogeyman. It's like, just move forward and, tell honest stories. People will find them. You have to have faith. It's all you can do. Or you just give up,
I have no question that if I was in their position and I was in this, having gotten screwed by that process, and I've been screwed by other processes in my life, so I know the feeling, that I would be particularly sensitized to it. It would be part of my worldview to achieve. But I would say, when you're thinking about storytelling, when I choose these subjects that I choose are not popular subjects like these guys choose, You know, nobody promised me a rose garden ever that I'd have a way to get it out there. Nobody gave Orwell a way that he was going to get published. Melville was dead before they published his work. I don't expect, as a person trying to make art, that there's supposed to be a place for me to get it out. It's gravy if there is. When I first met Claire, I couldn't believe such people existed. How wonderful. Then you take to that to its extreme, which is, let's say, the BBC. I remember when I went to Britain, I noticed they make a ton of documentaries every year compared to us. My editor thought we would do an 8-week edit. I watch my footage for 8 weeks. I don't even know what an 8-week edit. I buy an Avid in 8 weeks and choose between what, platform to get. They finish a movie in 8 weeks, so I was like, wow, they have a real media system. It's a media business. I then was living in Britain for a while, and I watched their television. Yeah, they make a lot of documentaries. Very few of them are as good as any of the documentaries that break through this crazy, hard-won meritocracy in this country, where, frankly, it's not a business. It's an art form of very impassioned, crazy people who work ridiculous hours, sacrifice their home lives and this and that. And then let's put this in the larger perspective. While we sit here, and that's why you find me a little bit sensitive about shop talk, while we sit here trying to perfect this issue, which is not worthless, but it's, among other things, there's other stuff to focus on. Laura Poitras, go read the New York Times article. She's running for her life right now in Berlin on the most real issue of the covering truth to power that you could have in the world right now. And simply by dint of the courage of her sacrificing so much of herself to get it out there and having such a risk being taken, it is a story that has massive movement for people. I believe their struggle will karmically benefit them. I think it will karmically benefit their film. When you stop the public from seeing something, you increase the value of the moment when the public gets to see it. They need to spin it that way as much as they possibly can and as much as they will listen. So I think the narrative, once you choose it, you have to literally figure, I am a missionary to the thing I care about, and I will stop at nothing, no ridiculous detail of the system I already knew was corrupt, no surprise, should slow that.
And Laura herself said the MacArthur grant helped shield her. She hoped that would give her some shield. So let's say there are, if you want to talk good money, bad money, that's it. I have to say thank you. This was so wonderful, and you were wonderful as an audience. Thank you to everybody on here for all the work you do and for everything you said.